Welcome back. Let's now talk about which trigger is more appropriate for our pipeline, and let's create that. So if you recall, our pipeline is doing just a copy of a file from a blob store to an Azure Data Lake. And we expect the file in the blob store to arrive once every day. And once we picked up the file, we go back and delete the file. So in our case, we know that we are not dealing with slices of data. So tumbling window trigger is not an appropriate one for us. Our trigger can be a scheduled trigger because we are expecting the file to arrive every day at a certain time. So we have developed a functionality within our pipeline to wait for 24 hours to pick the file. So we could schedule our trigger to run at midnight and then it waits for 24 hours. And whenever the file arrives, it picks the file and runs set and then it deletes the file at the end of it. So that is one option. And also we could have an event-based trigger because, as you know, we are deleting the file at the end of our processing and we want to process the next file as soon as it arrives. So we can have in storage event-based trigger implement this as in storage event-based trigger. So as we know, we need to pick the subscription and we need the storage account. In our case, it is the COVID reporting SA and we need the container. Let's pick it up from the drop-down here. And that is population. And if you remember, we were expecting the file called population_by_h.tsv.gz. And we want the event trigger to fire when the blob's created. And we can ignore the empty blobs because we know that our file has got data in it. And one thing to remember is when you create a trigger, it'll be in a post state if you leave as no. But if you want it to be activated, click on yes and then continue. You can do either. So you can do a no, create the trigger and then go back and activate it again. But I'm going to click yes and continue. Okay, we can ignore this warning here. We don't have any filters. We got the actual file name itself. So that's okay for us and click OK. And also, in order to use the event trigger, we need to register the Azure Event Grid resource provider to our subscription. So the help will be here, but let's go back to our portal. And then if you click on the three dots on the top and click all services from here, look for subscriptions. So you just have to type in subscription and click on subscriptions and pick your subscription. And then if you scroll down, you'll find resource providers under settings. And then we want to look for Event Grid. And this is the Event Grid subscription resource provider. As you can see, it's not registered. So click on register and that should register it. As you can see, the resource provider is now registered. It took about 5 minutes for me. And let's get back into the Data Factory. And before we click continue, we want to change the name of our trigger as well. So let's call it tr_ingest_population_data. And then click continue and click OK. And it should create the trigger. It's done the trigger. So let's click publish all. Okay, so that's because we haven't attached it to any pipeline. So let's go back to our pipeline. And this is the pipeline we want to attach the trigger to. And that'll be new edit. Let's pick the trigger and that's exactly what we gave previously. And then click continue here and click continue. And the pipeline has no parameters. We haven't parameterized anything. So let's do OK. And if we just do publish all, I published the trigger now and it's doing a published. Okay, it's completed the publish. And let's have a look to see whether the trigger is running. So as we know, we deleted the file from our storage account at the end of our last execution because we got the delete activity to do that. So if I refresh, there are no files here. Let's upload the file so that the trigger can fire and the upload's now complete. So let's have a quick look. Okay, so the triggers run through and it succeeded as well. Before we look into the pipeline results, I want to give you a quick tour of the monitor dashboard here so that you understand what we've been looking at. So when you come here, you've got the dashboards. Normally it would tell you how many pipelines and activities or triggers have run. So they are like default dashboards here. So at the moment we've only had one pipeline, which involved 5 activities. So if you remember, we've had the validation, get metadata, if condition, and also delete activity, and a copy activity. So the 5 have been counted here, and we've had one pipeline execution as well. And one trigger execution. So that's what the dashboard tells you. And if you want to look at the pipeline executions, you would look at here. And if you want to look at the trigger executions, that is in here. And we got the integration and runtime sessions. We've only have the default as used auto-resolve integration runtime. We haven't got any self-host at the moment. And data flow debug, again, we haven't touched on that yet. And if you want to create any alerts and notifications, you can do that here. So we can create a new alert rule and then we can send it to an email group. Or anything like that in case of failures or even success. So that is the monitor dashboard. But here, let's get into the trigger runs. So you've got one option to look at the trigger and that succeeded. And you can click on number 1 here because it worked, one pipeline to get the pipeline. Or you can look here for the pipeline as well. On both of those dashboards you also have the time filter. So if you want to look at the last 24 hours where the pipeline, it trigger runs in this case, then you do that. Otherwise, if it's 7 days, you can just change all of those things. You can filter for triggers when you have too many. It is very handy and you can look for any failures or successes and things like that here. So play around with these things. And also you've got filters now on the schedule and tumbling window or even our event trigger. So let's go back to all. As I said, you can look on pipeline runs here, but what I normally tend to do is actually I come and look at the trigger that's succeeded, and then I can click on that. And then get to the pipeline run from here. Okay, so that's done everything we expected the trigger to do, which is to invoke the pipeline and run the activities. And in this case it is the event trigger that we've looked at. I hope you've got a good understanding of triggers and the various types of triggers. And how to monitor them within the Data Factory. So that's the end of this session. I'll see you in the next one.